Perfect. So it's 3 past the hour, so basically we can get started. So very good morning, everyone. So um, for people who are basically joining in for the first time, I'm Shiva. I basically run technology for Cyber CNS, and along with me is my team who basically work on the product. And what we generally do is that I'm going to give you updates on the product during the first 15 to 20 minutes. And then we'll also talk about how we are basically going to evolve this particular platform going forward so that it becomes more valuable for partners. And what I'm looking for is basically feedback from you folks in terms of how basically this is, how useful will this be? And then let's basically kind of look at all the updates that we're going to basically bring in the next couple of weeks. So without much ado, I'm just going to share my screen. Just going to share. So some of the key changes that have essentially occurred over the last couple of weeks is essentially like there was basically a requirement that the agents be added to the add remove program in Windows so that basically it becomes visible and people can uninstall it easily from there. And so we've essentially kind of added this and basically made this available. This was something that was raised by some of the folks, and we essentially have kind of got that. I think one of the biggest things is that we are with the external scan beta, thanks to a lot of you, including Gary Knows, Chris Lewis, and Simon Hopkin. All of you basically gave us some excellent feedback. So basically the external scan basically is now has been upgraded even further. So you can essentially see kind of a new view of the external scan. You see all the open ports, what are critical vulnerabilities, high vulnerabilities. The most important thing is that the kind of detections that we are doing in terms of technologies, we can basically identify different web servers like Apache, web servers, Tomcat, all of those pieces. Plus, basically, we provide complete details of the vulnerabilities. So you can essentially see complete details of, like here is basically an Apache vulnerability from 2010. We also basically look at vulnerabilities such as PHP vulnerabilities, which could exist in WordPress and other systems over there overall. So basically, this helps us in order to be able to kind of gain compatibility with other tools that you're using today, such as Nessus, etc. So we've been kind of working on this in the background, and we basically are improving the ability of the engine to basically identify more and more technologies.
Yeah.
So with the ability to identify more technologies, we are able to identify more vulnerabilities. And we are essentially bringing this not just to the external scan. And as part of this week's release, like you will essentially see all of these scan capabilities coming into your network scan also. So all of the machines that we scan internally in the network will also have this complete set of details. And again, what we are essentially doing is that we are splitting out the way that we report on these vulnerabilities into 2 parts. One is essentially what we call as a summary, so which looks like this. And basically there is a second, which is essentially like details. And then you also see the common details that you used to see in the past, which is SSL attacks, certificate details, and what are the ciphers that are enabled and their grading. And so the entire set of details that are required for you to essentially do an external scan is now available. And this basically can, again, thanks to Dennis, we basically have introduced the 3 modes. So you can essentially do it in the quick mode, or you can essentially do a detailed scan, or you can basically do a complete full scan. And the only difference between the 3 of them is basically the amount of time it takes, because it basically takes a set of ports versus basically a subset of ports versus doing all the ports. So our recommendation generally would be to kind of do a subset, the scans, basically the subset of ports, the normal scans normally, and then you could probably on a monthly basis schedule a deep scan. So that's basically up to you, but that would be kind of a best the best thing that you could essentially do in order to kind of get results which basically really matter. Now, the second thing that we've actually been working on is, if you remember the way that we had integrated Azure Active Directory, it was, I would say, a little flaky and funky, because we were basically pulling the data dynamically at the time when you were essentially kind of pulling, like when you're clicking on the particular section. The problem with that is basically twofold. One is essentially we were depending on Microsoft to make the data available quickly. Second is we were basically not identifying changes on our own, but basically relying on Microsoft to basically provide us with a list of changes which we were listening to. So we've kind of changed this entire module and basically gone through a rewrite, where Azure Active Directory is now basically like Active Directory. We basically collect the data and then push it into Elastic. So there are two advantages to this. One is, while we are able to provide new dashboards which are basically compatible with what we are doing with the normal Active Directory, it also allows you to basically pull that data and basically play with that data and create new dashboards using the Azure Active Directory data. So an example of some of the reports that we've started building is basically like audit logs, computers, groups, role assignments, user data. We also are bringing the complete details of licenses, and basically what are the licenses, what are the categories of licenses and all of those, and you will get reports on those too. We are also basically working on getting a whole bunch of Office 365 compliances built out using the data that we're collecting from this. And we will be presenting some of the samples of those reports in the coming week. And I'll explain to you as to how we'll go through all of those pieces as we go forward. And this is an example of kind of the data that we have. You can basically get the complete list of users in Azure. You can get all the computers, which are basically, if it's managed in Intune, not managed in Intune, what are the asset IDs, all of those details. The other thing that the team has been working on in terms of integrations is basically we got a lot of feedback that our product needs to integrate with this tool called Nucleus Security, which provides a view from a risk compliance core perspective where you can aggregate multiple tools together. So we actually have worked with the team at Nucleus Security, and thanks to Jason Whitehurst, who basically introduced us to them and basically got this going. We basically are now able to push the data into Nucleus Security. So you can basically kind of integrate the credentials, provide the company mapping. And once you basically provide this company mapping, we automatically push the data into Nucleus, into the Nucleus dashboard. And then you can essentially see here, basically the source that you see is basically CyberCNS. So it basically kind of shows you all the data from this particular source. And so you can, you see all the Nucleus risk score and then the CVSS scores. And then you have all the vulnerability information that we have in our system also being pushed into that system. So this way, essentially, you have a different way of visualizing this data. Or if you're using this as a risk and compliance dashboard, then this becomes, it becomes easy for us to essentially push the data into it and for you to basically use this data. So this basically was something that we worked on, and we are also pushing the complete asset data into this. So you can essentially kind of use this asset data within this dashboard. So this integration will basically become live at the end of this week. The next thing that we've also done is that while we were essentially looking at multiple tickets which were coming in, one of the things that was coming up in a few cases was essentially with respect to firewalls. What we noticed was that the firewall integrations are basically at a global level. And unfortunately, when people are integrating the firewalls of a particular client, all the clients' credentials are basically available at a global level. And they are not able to basically kind of say that this, essentially, I want to make this credential visible only to this specific user or this specific user in this company. So now what we have basically given the capability is that a new integrate firewall screen is available under firewalls, which is basically in the normal company view itself. So you can actually add a firewall from here instead of basically having to go to integrations and the global view. And that way, what happens is that when you basically integrate the firewall here, if you have access, you as an admin have access to this specific company, then you will be able to add firewalls for this company and manage the credentials only for this company. So this allows the flexibility for us to essentially kind of create this going forward, where we can essentially put this together in a nice format. And so you can add firewalls, you can basically remove firewalls and basically provide the access to IT admin. This is especially useful for if you're an MSSP player, because what happens when you're an MSSP is that the actual credentials, etc., are managed by the MSP or by the end client. In that particular case, you can essentially provide them access to this whole thing. So this was another feature that we essentially added last week, and this is live. So going forward, what we are planning is, because there was basically quite a bit of feedback, and this was raised by Andrew Vatasco and a couple of others also, in terms of will we have planned release cycles, and also basically the whole fact that we basically go through a cycle of calls, we cancel a few calls, etc. So we essentially kind of sat through and basically walked through what we want to basically do. And what we've essentially done is that from this coming October, the 1st of October, we are essentially going to move into this model where week one, what we will be doing is to basically have a summary and description of all the features that we plan to be, that are going to be delivered the following month. Okay. And what we are going to basically do is review it with all of you, take your feedback, and then prioritize it based on the feedback that you folks provide us. And then we will essentially take that back to the take it back to our team, where we will start development on this. So week 2 and week 3, we basically plan to kind of move it into a little bit more of a mode where we can basically give back and basically do what people call a security training. But we will be running a series which is called True Security, where we'll be focusing on coaching on the fundamentals of security. And what I'm talking about fundamentals of security is, it's not about product. It's not about just saying that this new standard has come or that new standard has come, but essentially going down to the fundamentals to say, for example, what is a certificate? How do you generate a certificate? Why is a certain certificate valid or not valid? Why are certain ciphers considered insecure? So giving you the why behind all of the things that are happening, while it may be very technical in some cases, we also will basically give you the context of what is the business reason for why that particular thing has to be done. So the reason we wanted to do this is to basically say that, okay, when it's not just us, right? You basically get, you probably get 50 or 60 vendors who are talking to you, but everybody claims that their product is the best, and they basically claim so many things, right? Just as we do. But we would like to basically give you enough of information and education so that you can identify what is real, what is not real, etc. And in order to do this, we basically have Jason Whitehurst, who's been working with us basically, and has been working with a number of clients in terms of actually managing their entire whenever they get hit with ransomware or malware, etc. So, and plus we are going to basically be inviting others who are interested in presenting to is absolutely welcome. So, and the most important thing is that we don't care about if anybody is a CISO or anybody is not a CISO, etc. We absolutely welcome anybody who wants to basically present. But what we want to be able to do is to give content, which essentially is, it's like the true detective, right? We want to do true security, which is get into the details. How does it work? What does it do? And basically give that information back to everyone. Then week 4, what we will be doing is that we will basically take all of the work that we discussed in week 1. We will walk you through a demo of all the features, just as we do right now. And we will essentially get approval from you and any final changes that are required from a feedback perspective. All the updates for new features will be released on the first Friday of the month. So which means that the first Friday of October, the first Friday of November, the first Friday of December, basically will be the feature update release. And we will release it with the complete release notes and the complete documentation. Instead of the cycles that we're going through where the documentation is lagging, etc. So these are basically some of the weaknesses that we had in our process. And I thank a lot of you basically who came in and basically helped us understand that these were the weaknesses. So what we'll be doing is that we'll be kind of putting it through the release notes and basically have the documentation completed. Once this is done, we will essentially basically make the release. Bug fixes basically will be immediate and will not follow this cycle. And all the vulnerability updates that you're getting will also basically be on a daily basis. Okay. So this is essentially what we are planning starting from October, so that basically it is an optimum use of everyone's time, and we do not basically like you can basically plan it based on this. And I will be sending out the revised calendar invites to everyone based on this. The next thing that I will just want to quickly cover before I open it up for everyone on comments and go through the chat is, if you remember, we basically had the partner stock option plan, and there are people in that partner stock option plan. We basically actually sent out documents that you had to sign. In case you were one of the recipients and you have not signed, my request is please sign it as quickly as possible, because we will be basically shortly executing some of those agreements. So my request is that I think there are around 8 partners who have not signed. So my request is please sign it and send it back to us. And we will be releasing the version 2 of this entire plan very shortly with a new set of partners. So let's basically move forward with that. So this was essentially the update that we had for this week. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly go through the chat, and we will talk about any questions that you may have in this whole piece. So So Dennis had asked, will this include M365 events like suspicious logins, new forwarding rules, new app downloads, etc.? Yes, Dennis, this is what we are working on. And in fact, basically any new, even from an Azure perspective, even to the extent of we are looking at Power Apps, any new Power Apps which are installed, etc. Because one of the threat vectors that we've been noticing, at least in some of the regions over here, is like people have no control over Power Apps that are developed by people. So that entire piece is done. So Sean says, Sonic Wall, is it API or SSH? We have FIPS enabled on ours. Sonic Wall basically has both API and SSH. So basically, depending on the version and the model, it essentially uses one of them. So if you can let us know what is your model, then we can tell you what exactly it is using. Then will it include the ability to report MFA status on Implicit accounts? It's already there. In fact, we have a dashboard which essentially shows all accounts where MFA is not enabled. So that dashboard will be released this week, so you can actually have the complete view of all MFA enabled status. So would it make sense to migrate the M365 integration for the company dashboard as well? For the same reasons, non-CSP, I think CSP integration would need to continue to be in the global portal. Yeah. We are having new dashboards under the company level, and we also will have global dashboards which basically show overall compliance of Azure AD and Office 365. So we are doing both. We are not essentially doing this. And then I'm hoping that we'll get better technical documentation details about how different scans collect data flows. Not everyone cares about it, but some of us want to understand the details. Dennis, honestly, like I have written a white paper, which is there in the documentation, which says how Cyber CNS collects the data, where I've detailed every single piece of data that we collect and how we collect that data. So in case, I will basically send that in a DM to you. In case that data is not sufficient, please let me know. I will essentially kind of go through that data. If there is anything specific that you need, then we are absolutely happy to provide that data. So that covers the questions. And just, I'm hoping that we could have some conversation on a couple of items that I wanted to very quickly get this thing. Dennis, you had brought a point up about basically you wanted to understand something about how are we handling encryption and how are we handling the credentials, right? So since we are on the call, like, would you want to bring up the actual question so that I can answer it and it may answer a question for a lot of people here? Okay, Dennis, you're able to come off mute.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I think what I was looking for was, like within in the dashboard, we see like there are vulnerability scans, and then there are lightweight agent scans, and then there are offline vulnerability scans. I'm not sure everybody really understands what those are. I know it's taken me, I'm not sure I 100% understand, but just basically some more detailed explanation for like what data, like are we now at this point where the lightweight agents are sending data as it changes as opposed to on a schedule? Sort of those kind of details, like where, where's the data stored? When does it go from from the agent of the probe to the server? Those kind of data flow diagrams. I know I did review the document that you posted there. There are still some details that, again, I've struggled to understand some of the lower level details, but I have a feeling that a lot of people don't fully grasp, some of those details. Maybe some people aren't concerned about it, but I think some people really want to know. And sometimes clients ask questions. I'd like to be able to provide really authoritative and complete answers to those questions.
Okay. Dennis, the answer to that is basically, as you would imagine, basically this is like multi-layered, right? So the first thing is that when you there are different credentials. First is, let's talk about users. When you add users and where their credentials are stored. So users and their credentials are stored inside of Keycloak. Keycloak essentially uses a Postgres database, and that Postgres database is basically running on RDS in Amazon. And basically that is all of the user data is encrypted on that particular database. Again, the way that we use a Keycloak is not as a single tenant application, but we essentially use it as a multi-tenant application. So what that means is that for every partner that logs in, you essentially get your own tenant. And when you log into Keycloak, the only tenant is only your tenant is basically accessible to you. And that is the reason for why basically when you go to the mycybercns.com, it asks you for a tenant, because only when you specify the tenant can it lock on to your specific version of the Keycloak instance and then basically provide you with the data. Otherwise, so you cannot basically, it's not an open login system. So it's basically tied to the tenant. So unless you're basically going to your tenant's login page, you cannot essentially log into your system. So that's basically how we isolate the data from a user login perspective. Now, once yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think we have good documentation for the data flows at the server level. I was looking at it more from the perspective of the data flows on the local network, like how data is collected. How the probes collect data. I understand how the dissolvable agents work, but I'm not sure everybody knows that how the probe works. That it basically logs in over port 445, installs a dissolvable agent. That agent collects data, and then that agent is removed. That's partially documented, but I was just looking for better documentation of the data flows, because when we talk to clients, they're less concerned about how things are being managed at the server, on the server side, but they're very concerned about what's happening on their local networks. Like what kind of, what does this probe do? This is the question I get. What is this probe going to do when you install it on my network? And I like to be able to provide really good detailed data flows for here. It's going to do this and this and this, and the data is going to be stored here, and it's going to go to the server. That kind of documentation seems to be still a little bit lacking.
Understood, Dennis. So what we need is basically from an agent, especially a probe perspective, how is the data flowing from the probe to the end machine? How is it going back? And from the probe, how is it going to the cloud? And for example, the lightweight agent, it will be just basically between the lightweight agent and the cloud. So essentially the data flow and basically the mechanics of this thing. And plus, for example, if you're talking of like devices which are Linux or like the Cisco devices, then the communication protocols between that and basically what ports is it basically touching. So one diagram which shows the whole thing, and a description of each of those interfaces is what you're looking for, right, Dennis?
Yeah, I think we have that document. There is a good diagram for the server side. We don't have a similar diagram for what's happening on the local network.
I will update that, Dennis. I will update that by tomorrow and basically send you a version. And if you think that is good enough, then we will publish that version.
Yeah, I have basically, I have a couple of clients who are very diligent about wanting to know. So I've basically written out all that documentation, but I want to make sure that I'm accurate in some of the things that I'm saying.
Absolutely. So I'll make those updates in the documentation and send it back to you. And then basically, there was the second question, which was, will MFA enabled status also pick up third-party integration with Duo via conditional access? Chris, can you just explain this? Because if you use basically Duo as an authenticator app, right? Is it something else that you do with Office 365 in terms of integrating this with Duo?
Yeah, to get it to work, you have to add Duo as a third-party provider, and then within conditional access rules, you can apply it to whatever users or groups and whatever applications, and then you go to the access tab or whatever it's called and check the box for Duo rather than the built-in MFA. So there's really three ways you can enforce MFA. You can do it through the Azure MFA on a per user account basis. You can apply Azure MFA via conditional access, or you can apply a third party like Duo via conditional access. So we kind of have a mix of all three of those across our customer base right now.
Okay, so what we'll do is that we'll explicitly test this before we release it. So we basically know that this actually works, but I believe that we pick up the MFA status, whether it is third party or basically native. But we will basically verify this and provide that, make sure that this is basically picked up.
Okay, thank you.
So I think we've covered all of the questions that were there. If there are any other questions, comments, etc., then we can basically go through that.
Hey, Shiva, it's Steve Pollack. I have a question about application baselining. When we're trying to utilize that as a way to enforce compliance with all the agents and so on to get installed, which is what it's for. The question I have is, it shows a lot of things that we're never going to install the agent on. Is there a way to eliminate those from the application baselining so that that particular software package is not going to be installed on that device, so it doesn't continue to say we're failing?
So Steve, is it because, like, for example, you're saying that there are some Cisco routers or some of those devices on which it can never be installed, so it's showing up those devices as non-compliant?
Sometimes it might show a server that we're not going to install something on. It might show it actually shows iPhones. Sometimes it's showing a device that won't accept. It's not showing a Windows device. It's showing some other device that obviously is not going to get the software or service that we're trying to check for. So therefore, we never get a clean 100% list of the application baseline.
So in the application baseline, you can define basically for which OS that particular application baseline is applicable. So
Yes.
that would filter out a subset of these. But if you're basically still beyond that getting a further filter, there are two things then I can basically see. One is essentially there is a choice that you say that I don't want to install it on these machines. And so we'll basically provide an exclude assets list where you can essentially give the list of assets that you want to exclude from this rule. And the second thing that we can also do is to basically say that exclude certain asset types, which essentially could be that if it's a phone or if it's this, etc., then we don't want to read this thing. So we can add some exclusion rules. Let me work with the team, Steve, and basically come back with an idea by end of day tomorrow. I'll send a mail to you. And if you're
That'd be great. I'll try to get a list of what I'm seeing and see if that's of any help to you and send that over.
Absolutely. So if that's the case, then I will send that over to you tomorrow, and then we can, if you're okay with it, then we'll basically put this in this week's development cycle and basically get that out.
And then one other question. I know long ago you told me I had a brilliant idea, and that was when to show a graph of the progress on reducing in the remediation, where on a patch Tuesday, where all of a sudden we were doing great, and now our RMM tools slowly rolling out a patch to show that that remediation is happening in a graph pattern on that remediation page. Did we ever do that?
Steve, honestly speaking, that I think we built out that graph, but we never released it. I will basically, in the remediation page where we show the different operating systems and that table, we will basically push that graph and basically put a graph. So I'll put it as a 30-day timeline. So
that'd be great. They're just to show, when you show it to a client, you can say, I have a trend, I'm trending down. It's actually doing what it's supposed to do.
got it.
That's great. Thank you.
So Henry, this actually we fixed, and I think I sent you a message on this. For application baseline rules, you basically, we have global rules, and then you have company specific rules. If the company specific rules are basically in conflict with the global rules, only then the company specific rule will be applied, else all the global rules are applied. The only thing that I think we have not done is basically given you a UI where you can essentially ignore a global rule for a specific company. And that is something that we were supposed to add, but I think that we got into a challenge with that, and we got sidetracked. So I will make sure that that happens. Prashali, can you just please note this down, because this was a request that Henry had placed and we had not fulfilled, which is I need to be able to take a global rule and exclude it for a certain company.
Sure, sir. Noted.
So Chris, you basically are tagging the desktops and you're getting them excluded from the baseline rule. So is that working for you right now?
Yeah, it works really well for us. So we have a VMware Horizon environment where we're using Duo through a never mechanism to provide the MFA to it, so it doesn't actually get stalled into the non-persistent desktops. So by tagging those in CyberCNS, I can exclude them from our application baseline and still get any machines that are missing Duo for Windows without a bunch of false positives.
Understood. So Jerry, you had asked for the AD report that includes GPU objects. This was done and released also. So what I will do is that I will basically get my team to basically either get on a call with you, and we'll also send you a document as to where that report is. It's there in the standard reports, and we basically also created, I think, a couple of things in the report builder. So I will send you details on that. It was this was already added post your request. The one thing that I know that the team had asked for and we have not yet added is basically when you when you add an AD into the system, the ability to choose a specific OU alone to basically be scanned and not all the OUs. That is the only feature request that basically is still pending. And that is basically coming up in the upcoming release. So we are basically adding that particular feature. So that's perfect. So I think we had a great discussion today. Any other challenges that anyone is facing while using the product? Any reports that you're missing? Any additional data that you think would be useful? And I'm really thankful to all of the folks like Chris and others who basically kind of shared a lot of inputs for us in order to basically finish up the external scan. And what we are doing right now is basically kind of taking each part of the section by section and basically kind of seeing how we can basically be the best in that category. And so all the inputs that you provide us basically help us basically kind of get better at that particular piece. Right now, we are also working completely, just to give you a background, the team is completely working on rewriting our entire compliance engine, because if you know the evolution of the product, we basically just kept adding compliances, and because basically it has come to a stage where it is a little too heavy. Second is that we are also seeing that the agent is becoming too heavy because it's doing the compliance and vulnerability, etc. And we want you to have the ability to define what kind of compliance you are going to basically apply on a specific customer, right? So you may not want to do HIPAA compliance on a non-medical customer. You may not want to do X compliance. You are basically not based out of Australia, so then essentially it does not make sense for you. So the ability to define what compliances make sense for from a global perspective. Second is from each company perspective. So what we will be doing is that we will run the compliance scans only for those specific standards and make them available. And again, when we're making them available, we are basically trying to make that more something that can be absorbed easier. And I'm just being very honest. We looked at the way Nucleus is showing some of the data, and we think that we can also represent the data in a much better fashion, especially from a compliance perspective, so that you can essentially get a complete view instead of the kind of view where we have to go back and forth. So we are working on that kind of a view to basically bring that out. So this is essentially what we have. Okay. So perfect. So if we have any more questions, we are here. If there are no more questions, then as I said, a few of the folks basically have not signed the documents. I can at least see Tim over here and Jerry Johnson. You folks have received the documents. My request is please sign those documents and turn it over to us, because we plan to basically kind of execute them very shortly. Perfect. I'll basically send this out again today. So if there are no more questions, then I'll give back 18 minutes back to you folks. And thank you all for basically participating in the call today, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, Shiva and company.
Thank you very much.